lecture. The guest speaker of tonight is Tim Benton. And for the people in the world of architecture, design, it is a famous name. And when I was talking to him, I said, well, I looked in the library on the books that we have written by him. And as you can see, it is, some of them are about Le Corbusier, Le Corbusier villas. He's a specialist on Le Corbusier villas. Others are not that big, but they are courses for Open University. And he told me that when he started this in '75, he wrote in the time it became a famous book. A little bit maybe by coincidence, but it has been on show at the Biennale in Venice and at the CCA. It was an open course, but it had also TV programs with it, radio shows. It was on national television. I think we could have talked here 1.5 hours about this side of your work. But as we see, he is also on Le Corbusier villas, famous houses. So his lecture is called Eileen Gray, Art Deco to Modern. I look at Natasha and see, did I forget anything at the moment?
No, just interesting that Tim started on Monday.
Yeah.
Just to give you an impression of his vitality, on Monday evening he was in Oslo at Villa Stennersen, Arne Korsmo designed house. Yesterday he was in Cologne, and the Ungers Archive organized it, and the lecture was in the Walraaf Richards Museum. Today he's here, Monday in Prague, and Tuesday in Brno, in Villa Tugendhat,
Right.
and Villa Müller in Prague. So I'm really happy that he takes the effort.
Thank you. So there is the lecture first, then there is a time for a few questions, and then we'll show the film. Tim, go ahead.
Thank you. Am I live? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I'd like to begin by thanking the originator of this series, Natasha Draber and Iconic Houses. I think it's a wonderful feat of organization to put this together, and we wouldn't be anywhere without her enthusiasm and organizing skills, and Hetty Behrens for the reception here at the new institute, which is very, very nice. I have to explain a little bit the structure of this lecture, and I think that could be a criticism of the lecture, because normally lectures should have a natural structure that unfolds, but this one is a little bit special, because I'm not doing a general description of Eileen Gray as a designer. I'm not doing a general description of the house, E-1027, which she designed, but I'm doing a little bit of both. And what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to answer the question, why is Eileen Gray a unique designer, and what is involved in trying to recreate her furniture, and why are we trying to recreate her furniture? So I'm going to do this in this way. I'm going to start with a slightly general discussion about the relationship between Art Deco and modernism. I'll explain why when we get into it. Secondly, I want to follow the route that Jean Badovisi, this young Romanian architect that became very friendly with Eileen Gray, and Eileen Gray took from Art Deco to modernism. And then I'm going to look at some examples of her furniture in E-1027 and the work of restoration that's involved there. I've been involved now for 5 years in the general project to restore the house, and we're at the stage now when we're restoring the furniture especially. So this comparison, can we have the lights down a bit? Bring my images up a little bit? Yeah, great. This comparison shows on the left a chair that Eileen Gray designed for her then lesbian lover, Damia, the famous singer in Paris, and in 1922. And on the right, a chair which she designed for her then male lover in 1928 or thereabouts, called the nonconformist chair. Eileen Gray is normally discussed in 2 quite separate chapters. She was a famous Art Deco designer. The lights keep coming up and down. Can we get them a bit lower? Is that possible? Okay. She was a very famous Art Deco designer. One of her chairs was sold for 18 million euros. It's the biggest sale of a single piece of furniture in the history of sales and so forth. And that's one whole chapter. She made her career in Paris between 1900 and 1929. And then there's this modernist phase when she designed this house that we're going to look at, and tubular seal chairs like this. And these things are normally kept apart, and any suggestion that in her modern phase there were traces of her Art Deco work is usually seen as a criticism. And I'm trying to bridge that gap and saying it's not a criticism, it's what makes her unique and I think is interesting. So some definitions. Art Deco was modern. It was a different kind of modern than that which we now call modernism. But it was a radical break from the past, albeit drawing on many existing cultural trends. So I worked on a couple of exhibitions on Art Deco, a big one at the V&A in 2003. But in that, I give a definition. I'll give it to you for what it's worth. Okay. Art Deco was the modern but not modernist response to modernity. Okay. It was also an evolution from Art Nouveau, and it was very eclectic in its sources: Secession style, Neo-Rococo, early Classicism, Japanism, African art and sculpture. But it basically, the driving force is its response to modernity. It was not strictly a style because it looked very different, one thing from another, but it was recognizable. And I say it's one of the three effectively international styles of the 1920s and 30s. There are Deco, Beaux-Arts, Classicism, and Modernism. And it was Modernism that tried to capture the title of international style for itself, but it wasn't the only one. If you compare, let's see if we, Art Deco and Modernism, there are certain things that stand out that seem very, very clear. Modernism was against ornament. It was designed for, it was intended to promote the idea of working for the greatest number, for people, the mass of people, and not for individual rich clients. It had a theory which related structure, the idea of the zeitgeist representing the age and so forth, and a relationship with modern art. Art Deco had no theory. It creeps up from the edges. Art Deco arrives in architectural journals in the advertisements before you see it in the photographs. And it's, there's, as I say, modernism has a theory of social determinism. It's there to solve the problems of society. And this picture, which you all know, Le Corbusier's Esprit Nouveau Pavilion, is an expression of all these things. It was designed as a cell that could be reproduced and stacked in immeuble villa for working people, supposedly. The furniture is not designed by the architect, it's just bought in maples, armchairs, or tonne armchairs, and so forth. And these are objects, this is equipment, it's not lavish furniture. And if you compare this with Eileen Gray, this is a boudoir that she designed for an exhibition in 1923, hall and boudoir at Monte Carlo. This is exactly the opposite. It's extremely lavish materials. There's a lacquer screen, a huge lacquer screen behind, fantastically precious materials, extraordinary exotic lamp here with this extraordinary lampshade, and sort of neo-African type stand, zebra wood inlaid here with mahogany and ivory, rug that she designed herself, this fur throw which she liked to include, and one of her lacquer screens. So a big difference between these two things, you might say. And so normally when you talk about Art Deco, you think of very luxurious materials, very beautiful craftsmanship. This is Ruhlmann, a desk by Ruhlmann. But what's interesting to me is where Art Deco and modernism comes very close, kissing distance close. And these are examples like Pierre Charot. This is one of many desks that he designed like this. There's no ornament, but modernists would still consider this to be Art Deco, and it's handmade and so forth. And what's interesting is that Art Deco was something, I say it was like Mephistopheles at the shoulder of Faust. You know, it's a temptation that artists and architects, modernist architects had and they slipped into Art Deco. This is an example by Albert Laprade, who is basically a Beaux-Arts architect who used stripped columns and so forth. But when he was given a commission to do an electricity showroom, he produces a pure piece of Art Deco. Or this, which is the famous example of the garage, also by Laprade, in the Rue Marbeuf. You could say it's modern in that it has this huge plate glass window, but it's a completely Art Deco expression. It's a jazz modern expression. So one of the distinctions which goes deeper, if you like, is the idea that Art Deco has an iconography. It's about references to other things. And modernism is not supposed to have an iconography. You're not supposed to see modernist things as representing something else. Take the example of ocean liners, airplanes, and motor cars. Le Corbusier wrote 3 chapters in his book Vers une architecture, where he points to these wonders of modern engineering as examples that architects should follow. And his argument is, if architects designed houses like marine engineers designed ships, or engineers designed airplanes, then their architecture would be much better. But what he doesn't do is imitate the forms of marine architecture in his buildings. That imitation, that representation of marine architecture is firmly in the hands of Art Deco. Art Deco designers, in many cases, designed the interiors of the ships and so forth. And in one of his lectures in 1924, and again in his book, L'Art décoratif d'aujourd'hui, which is a root and branch criticism of Art Deco, of the decorative arts, he uses this example. He says, look at the ocean liner Paris. What a wonderful structure it is with these open spaces, wonderful sense of openness and of transparency and so forth. But go down the staircase by Edgar Brandt and into the hall, and you have this Art Deco monstrosity. And this is what he says. He says, just now you saw the ocean liner Paris, and it must have appeared to you like a wonderful thing, a superb thing. And then in this same ocean liner, we showed you the Salon, which certainly cast a cold shiver through your minds. It seems, in fact, astonishing to prove at the heart of such a perfectly organized structure something which is so different, an antinomy, something contrary, such a loss of liaison, really a contradiction, a complete divergence between the great lines of the ship and its interior decoration. So this is the kind of theoretical fault line between Art Deco and modernism. And to give another example, this time from Bruno Taut, in his book, which in English was called Modern Architecture, Moderne Baukunst in German, published simultaneously in 1929, he explicitly brings out this fault line. He illustrates, and for some reason I couldn't find a photograph of the ocean liner SS Australia, and he traces over it to create a villa here, where you can see the elements of the ship with the bridge and the railings and so forth. And this is his way of mocking the idea that modern architecture imitates ocean liners. So the use of porthole windows, he says the use of railings with horizontal slats that allows the seawater to flood out easily, that modern architects used. This is bad. You know, modern architects should not be imitating ocean liners. They should be designing buildings in the same way that the engineers design ships. And here we have a problem, because Eileen Gray's house, E-1027, is saturated with marine imagery. There's a staircase which looks like the steel staircase you have in ships. It has a long promenade deck with canvas awnings like you have on a ship. It has a big window like you get on a ship. And the whole thing looks out over the sea. And just to make clear, in case you hadn't got the message, she hangs a buoy on the thing. Now, I say all this because this is the house now as it's being restored. And the question of whether to put this buoy, this lifesaver, on the balcony took hours of debate. You know, should we clean up Eileen Gray and get rid of this embarrassing Art Deco decoration. And of course, I'm glad to say we didn't. This is the rug she designed for the house. Again, saturated with marine imagery. And even her furniture. This is the Transat chair. The Transat is a deck chair. It's the kind of heavy deck chairs you get in ocean liners. And she did her version, she did her version of this beautiful chair, the Transat chair, with a covering which was originally made of this tuile enduite, which is a kind of cheesecloth, light cotton covered with a sort of waterproof covering. And with this, sorry, I keep doing the wrong thing, this absolutely beautiful handmade, it's jumping. It knows what I want to say before I say it. Okay, I'll try and keep my hand. It's all beautifully done with nickeled brass junctions. And it's not at all like a deck chair, but she calls it a deck chair. And this wonderful armchair she called the bibendum. Bibendum being the man made of tires that Michelin used to advertise its tires. So she always kept an iconography. She liked the idea of things having names and having associations. And another example of this fault line, this is another version of this chair, because what's interesting about all these things is they're all one-off pieces. These are all one-off pieces. So there's several versions of the Transat chair, there are several versions of the bibendum chair. Just to give an example of this fault line between modernism and Art Deco, when Le Corbusier and his friend Jean Badovici had a rather unpleasant row in 1949, in the winter of 1949 and 1950, which was connected with the paintings that he had done 10 years earlier in the house. But there's a very bitter exchange of letters between them. And when Le Corbusier what Badovici says is, your paintings, you have used the house as a laboratory to experiment with your artistic ideas. And this house, which is a pure expression of functionalism. And Le Corbusier comes back and he says, this pure expression of functionalism with its labels, little labels, you know, enter slowly, pajamas, petits choses, this is kind of underwear, dresses, shoes, overcoats, and so forth. This, for him, is obviously comical, whereas it's a wonderful piece of Eileen Gray's design, that is architecture parlante in a direct sense. Don't laugh, a place to put the pillows near a bed and so forth. And so this is the idea of designing a house. She said she designed E-1027 for a bachelor, that is Jean Badovici, who likes to entertain, who likes sport. And I think the house is trying to tame Badovici. It's trying to tell him how to behave. So, for example, in the entrance, Entrez lentement, written by Eileen Gray, when Le Corbusier did his mural painting there, I'm not going to talk about the mural paintings, you can ask about it afterwards, but that's not what we're going to talk about here. I've written a book about it if you want to read about it, which won a prize, incidentally. If one doesn't do one's own publicity, who's going to do it? But he had the grace to at least keep this writing, although he mocked it later. So that's the original piece of the wall where he kept Eileen Gray's writing. So I'm now going to talk about the journey that Jean Badovici and Eileen Gray took together from Art Deco to modernism. I'm not going to hold this anymore. Because it's sometimes said, in fact it's almost always said, wrongly, that when Eileen Gray met Badovici, Badovici was a modernist, and she was converted to modernism by Badovici. This is not the case. When Eileen Gray met Badovici, he was more interested in Art Deco than in modern architecture. Having said that, we don't really know when they met, but if everybody says what they say is true, if it's 1922, that's when Badovici was still interested in Art Deco. And in 1925, one of the really high points of Art Deco was this volume that Jean Badovici edited, and which Eileen Gray worked on, called Intérieur Français, which is an absolutely beautiful book. I'm going to show you a couple of pages from it, and it's dedicated to Eileen Gray. This is the copy, her copy, which is in the Dublin National Museum of Ireland. It's dedicated by Albert Morancet, the publisher, to Eileen Gray for her precious collaboration in this volume. We don't quite know what that was, but according to Eileen Gray's biographer, Peter Adam, they worked on it intensely together. So this is what that volume was like. This is 1925. This is the year before she starts designing E-1027. And that's an interior by Pierre Charot there, and this is one of the absolutely extraordinary pages of Paul Poiret, his company called Martine, which is based on floral designs done by very young girls. He had a kind of group of 13 to 15-year-old young girls who did these naive designs that he turned into textiles. And this is right at the end of Paul Poiret's great kind of rule. He dominated the Art Deco scene, but it finished really in 1925. So they were working on this together as late as 1925. And in the book, there's a page of her work with one of her fantastic lacquer screens, a table and a rug, and it's written by her that the colors are wrong. It should be silver and not gold. So she's clearly working on this with Badovisi as late as 1925. And this is the thing I've already shown you, the boudoir and hall for Monte Carlo, which he had exhibited 2 years before in 1923. So when Morancet gave Badovisi the chance to start a new architectural magazine, Architecture Vivante, in autumn and winter 1923, he starts with Art Deco. He'd already published a volume of Sue Aymar, the architect and artist designer Sue Aymar, and this is a page from the 1923 issue. And the sort of modernizing architecture that he admired was people like Auguste Perret and Sauvage, and these were the architects that exactly in the winter of 1923, Le Corbusier had split off from completely. There was a bitter argument between Le Corbusier and Perret accused Le Corbusier, rightly really, of formalism, and Le Corbusier accused Perret of being old-fashioned and not understanding modern architecture. And when, in that first volume, Badovisi does include a plaster model and plan of one of Le Corbusier's houses, the Maison Besnus from Vaucresson, it's accompanied by a fairly lukewarm text in which he says that the owners of any house like this would have to throw away all their possessions because there was nowhere to put things. So he certainly wasn't a fan of Le Corbusier at the start of this adventure. In 1924, there was an exhibition of French design with some pieces by Eileen Gray. And very interestingly, Jan Wils, which you see here, and J.J.B. Oud, and a number of other modernist architects in Holland picked up on Eileen Gray, picked her out from this collection. And there was an issue of Wendingen, the famous journal which you all know, Wendingen, which was dedicated to Eileen Gray, with a very positive piece by Jan Wils and also a connection with Oud. And this is the first piece of writing that Badovisi does about Eileen Gray. Again, very positive. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the content, but it's quite interesting that this piece, this is a draft of the piece in 1924, Badovisi still doesn't know how to spell her name. So I think those that thought that they were lovers by 1924, I don't know about you, but I think I usually know how to spell the names of my lovers. On the second page as well, so it's not an accident. And in fact, I mean, there are a number of published pieces about Eileen Gray spell her name wrong. The French have a lot of difficulty pronouncing the word Eileen with an E, I-L-E-E-N. To make that sound in French, it would be spelled A-Y-L-E-E-N. So French people think it's Hélène. That's one of the difficulties. Okay. So this is 1924, where Badovisi writes another piece on Eileen Gray, and he has an extremely interesting argument. If any of you want to follow this up, you want to read this text, because his argument is to say that the modern world, modernity, modern world, which is scientific, rational, geometric, is difficult to understand, impossible to understand by most people. But Eileen Gray, the romantic, sensual artist manages to understand the modern world and put it into her work. Eileen Gray has translated this the universal reason of forms and things which the scientific thinking expresses and demonstrates, but which our sensibilities do not yet know how to perceive. It's a very interesting and radical argument, and it's one exactly the kind of bridge between Art Deco and modernism which I'm trying to get you to think about. So he publishes this thing once again next to Frank Lloyd Wright, and I'm sure that he came to Frank Lloyd Wright through the Dutch connection, because as you know, the Dutch were much more interested in Frank Lloyd Wright than the French, especially ever since really his publication in 1908, but there were many Dutch architects in the 20s who were working within a Wrightian style. And he publishes some de style things, including this colored, pochoir-colored design for an exhibition in Berlin by Wilmot Hussar, in which there's this whole elementarist idea of using color on the walls to create a kind of spatial flow. And of course, it's something that other people were doing as well. Mondrian, Lisitsky, I won't go into all that, you know all about that. And Rietveld, of course, did his Berlin chair, and Eileen Gray came home from the visit to Holland and did a de Stijl table in sort of celebration of this discovery. There was, of course, also the 1923 exhibition of de Stijl in Paris in October 1923, which they certainly saw. And there were, of course, the influence of de Stijl in other places, including Mies van der Rohe's Brick House, which was also published in Architecture Vivante. So there's a big de Stijl trend going on, which Badovisi is actually rare in French publications to celebrate. In the same volume, though, he also illustrates Le Corbusier's house for his mother, Le Lac on Lake Geneva, which, of course, is completely different. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I think that Eileen Gray may well have warmed to the relationship between Rietveld and Truus Schroeder, you know, this partnership between a man and a woman, client and an architect, which is also a sentimental and emotional relationship. And they visited the Schroeder house. And of course, you all know the Schroeder house is known for its amazing opening up of space so that you could have a daytime use of the house completely open, which was then closed off at night to make bedrooms and so forth, with movable screens which slid behind the walls, but which are also reflected in different surfaces in the floor. And we've seen that this is an elementarist thing of coloring different things on the wall. Where am I leading with all this? Well, there's a little mystery. This is the interior of E-1027, as we've restored it. But there's a line in the floor here, which goes up the tiling, and which comes up, this is, what I've just shown you is this line, and there's one at right angles to it, where you can see it's a T-junction, and it looks as if, at some point, Eileen Gray was thinking of doing a Schroeder house type thing with partitions that slid back. Goodness knows where they would have gone, but it got as far as being represented in the floor of the building. And what's more, when Pierre-Antoine Gattier, the restorer, the architect who did the first restoration of the house, did his stratification of the walls to try to find the right color to paint the walls, he and his researchers found a polychromatic treatment of the wall, and actually, which he reconstructed. And here's some of the scratchings to show the colors. It's actually quite, there's a long thing about this, whether he actually did the right reconstruction, but it doesn't matter. There was clearly a polychromatic treatment of the wall that was done and was then painted over in 1929. And this produced a big problem for us because, you know, Gattier, famous architect, fiercely defended his discovery, and there's this whole architectural theory about the palimpsest, about the layers of design, that you should represent the couche, like an archaeological couche of the different stages of a design. And it might have been, you know, very interesting intellectually to show something, even if it wasn't in the version that they decided to publish in 1929 in a special edition of Architecture Vivante, which was published entirely about the house. But we decided that we wanted to get back as much as possible to this effect of 1929. Now, there's a whole debate one could have about that. So this is how we've restored it, to the point of hiding behind a screen here a painting by Le Corbusier. So this is one of 7 paintings that he did, first of all in 1938, and then in 1939. And again, I'm not going to talk about this because it's a long story. But, I mean, basically everybody working on this house divides into Eileen Gray fans and Corbusier fans. And I'm in the rather painful position of having a leg in both camps. And I have to, I try to speak against the outrageous statements of each camp when they make them. But anyway, I'm absolutely in favor of this solution for probably a wrong reason, which is that I think that this is the worst of Le Corbusier's paintings and it does most damage, so it's a purely aesthetic judgment of mine, which I shouldn't impose on anybody else. But also, it just is the fact that this is such an iconic view of Eileen Gray's design that Le Corbusier's painting really destroyed it. You'll see it later, don't worry. So what's remained of this steel aesthetic in Eileen Gray is, the color's gone, are 2 things. There's this screen. Now, she was doing beautiful lacquer screens all the way through her career as an Art Deco designer. This is a kind of constructivist screen, which could be used to be drawn across to make a private space. And this, which is the layering of space through the coloring in the floor. And she uses this throughout the house. And it's one of the wonderful things. There's this big open space. Again, I mean, like Le Corbusier did, to have partitions. There's a shower behind there, and doesn't reach the ceiling, and there's another partition just behind here, and so forth. And the kind of conceptual managing of the space is done with the floor tiles. And that managing of the space is extended to the exterior. And there's a controversy about this, because in the 1950s, all this had degraded, and Badovisi made a rather horrible and very badly constructed concrete slab here, with some little tiles decoratively laid around, which itself had split and folded, because basically all these terraces are just slipping down to the sea, so they'll slip. And the question was, do we restore this 1950s Badovisi creation to maintain Badovisi's presence in the design, again, the palimpsest and so forth, or do we recreate, and this is a complete recreation of Eileen Gray's intention? And again, we went for Eileen Gray's intention, whether you like it or not. So Eileen Gray's first experimentation really in architectural design is really a dress rehearsal for E-1027. And it was is this model and plans, there are various different versions in the models, for a house for an engineer in the south of France. The engineer was Badovisi in the south of France, And you can see it's a very de Stijl plan still, obviously influenced by Mies van der Rohe. And it uses the feature of the site, which is terraces which go down towards the sea, which had citrus trees on it. But the other important influence was completely different, which was Le Corbusier's house for his mother, which I mentioned. This is the plan of Le Corbusier's house for his mother, which again has semi-open spaces, all organized around a big window, horizontal window, which looks out to the sea. This is the house on Lake Geneva, right next to the wall, sea wall. This is the window in the garden where you also frame the view, and this is the long window. Eileen Gray went to see it, and she admitted that it was an important influence for her in the design of the house. And you can see, I mean, you see it best at night, where although the window is a picture window with concertina glass panes that can fold away completely, the effect of the long window is created by the canvas awnings. And so when you sit or you take a photograph from a low position like this, you have this beautiful view of the ocean framed by the horizontal band. Oh, that comes from Le Corbusier. It's a nice picture, isn't it? So this is the plan of the house. It's turned round, I'm afraid, but this is the picture window. This is the balcony outside. This is the main living area with the wall where there's the Corbusier fresco here, a shower room behind, the dining area here with a bar, which we're restoring now. So if you want to invest in the property, this is what in the restoration. Please, we're doing a fundraising campaign. If you Google E-1027 teasers, you'll find some teasers that I made to promote this this fundraising campaign. And you go through this bar area, and here is the bedroom. But I'm not going to do a whole tour of the house. This is the entrance. You can see how she's canted it away from the restants, as they call them, the terraces. This is the picture window in the state that Gattier left it, that is completely empty. And this is the view as we've restored it recently. But the site is not just Eileen Gray's house. It consists of Le Corbusier's cabanon, the hut that he designed for himself in 1952, in which he spent a lot of his time in the summers, but even in the winter, from 1952 until his death in 1965. It also includes the restaurant, the fish restaurant, which was set up by a plumber from Nice called Thomas Rebutato in 1949. Le Corbusier and some friends of his who had borrowed E-1027 were working on the plan for Bogota, were his first customers. Okay. And Le Corbusier became very friendly with Rebutato and Rebutato's family, and he kind of moved in on the family. And then these are the unités de camping, which are some very small, very beautiful little, very, very simple bedrooms for campers who could pay for a month or something like that and produce some revenue for Rebutato. So when Gattier finished his work in 2010, he wanted to leave the house empty. He wanted it to be a laboratory. So he left, for example, the samples, the color samples, big color samples, and this is where the fresco is being restored behind there. And he wanted to leave it like that. Here, for example. And we had this big decision to make. And actually, I was one of the ones who before the Association Cap Moderne, which has been restoring the house since 2014, was set up, there was another association set up by Thomas Rebutato's son, which I was a founder member of, and I'm the vice president of now. And we said, the house is going to be open to the public. It can't be shown to the public like this. It's a travesty. So we had made, actually, I'm sorry, I've done this in the wrong way. We had made 5 pieces of furniture, not perfect reconstructions at all, but which showed the workings of some of the Eileen Gray's fitted furniture. We'll come to one of those in a minute. So one of the first things to be restored after Gattier left, because he hadn't done anything with the garden, this is the solarium, which was restored. And there was a debate here about how to restore this, because there was a problem that there was a eucalyptus tree in the corner there, which had lifted up the ground, and the whole thing the roots had destroyed the corner, and you can see the whole thing had split and was going downhill. So it had to be restored. And the question was, do you dig underneath the whole thing, make a concrete raft, carefully make horizontal again these old tiles, clean them up a bit perhaps, and so forth, or do you do something else? And the problem was the tiles were so saturated with salt, they completely decomposed, that one of the people was debating about this. He picked up one of the tiles, wanting to argue that they should be preserved, and it fell apart in his hand. So this is one of the accidents of history. So what we did was we replaced them with tiles which have exactly the same chemical structure, but which are like they would have been new, and we've done the usual thing of leaving a sample of the best the tiles that we could find in the corner, so you can compare. But we decided that there's no point doing something, and François Gauvain who talks at the beginning of the restoration film, and he talks about this. He'll explain a little bit the story. So this is the team that's been doing the restoration since 2010. There's Claudia Deveau, the architect, who has a diploma in conservation. And in France, you have to have a diploma in conservation to be able to work on a listed building. Before that, it could only be the architecte en chef des monuments publics who could do it, but the law was changed. This is Arthur Rueg, who many of you may well know as a great scholar and expert architect who's restored a number of buildings, modernist buildings in Switzerland, has a fabulous collection of modernist furniture, which he's given to the museum in Zurich. He's also the world expert on Le Corbusier's colour. He's the world expert on Charles Perrion's furniture, and so forth. And then here is Renaud Barrez, who was a young man in 1999, I think, got a job from the town hall in Roquebrune to study the building prior to a restoration. And he became absolutely obsessed with the building. He did a fantastic job of researching every aspect of the building. He collected everything, documented everything, measured everything, went and found all comparable pieces of furniture and private collections, measured those, and so forth. And he is the kind of historian behind the restoration. And then this is Burkhard Ruckschio, who is well known as the restorer of buildings in Austria, and especially buildings by Adolf Loos, including the house that I'm going to see in a few days' time in Prague, the Müller House. And this is this is really a very good, a top team of people who, of course, can't agree about anything, as is the case in anything as delicate and specialized as this. And it's been an absolute privilege for me to hearing them talk and hearing them argue about how to do these restorations. One of the key things that happened in this whole project was that in France, there's bureaucracy everywhere, but bureaucracy in conservation in France is particularly heavy. And basically, you have to have a commission. First, you have to commission, first of all, an étude, a study, and that takes 8 months. And then you put a thing out to tender, and that takes another 9 months, and then the work starts, and so forth. And this could never operate like that because it was funded basically by a millionaire called Michael Lickerman, and he had a time frame. Everything had to be done in 5 years. And so what he did was he set up a comité scientifique with the great and the good on it, French but also international. And that comité scientifique was given the task of providing some kind of rules and approaches and trying to persuade the authorities, the French authorities, that we could go ahead. And what was used as the case study was this, the bathroom. And Arthur Rueg did a restoration of the bathroom. So that's as it was in 1929. That's as it was in 2010, after Gautier had finished with it. And this is how Arthur restored it. And you can see some of the kind of difficulties. There are no original drawings for this lamp. This photograph is it. There's nothing else. And so to reconstruct this lamp is, as Arthur says, you'll see in the film, it's a hypothesis. You know, he's done one version. He did a version of it, but immediately afterwards, Burkhard decided his version wasn't right, and Burkhard did another version of it. So you can see these are all debates. I mean, it's real research into getting into the mind of the designer. So this is the version that Burkhard Ruckschio did. Arthur did a version in which he made only this frame and what looks like a second frame here. You know, Arthur says is a shadow line. And he showed by an analysis of the angle of light that it was a shadow line, that it couldn't have been metalwork. Burkhard believed, and also part of Arthur's argument was that there's no need for the second frame. You know, why have the second frame at all? Burkhard decided that you needed the second frame to hold another piece of glass that protected the wall from the light. Now, I can't judge, you know, but so we have these two examples of the lamp. Also, no idea what color this glass should be, you know. This is, again, is a complete hypothesis. Arthur says it must be a warm color because nobody would design a cold light in a bathroom. Sounds convincing to me. Burckhardt made it gray because for him he didn't want to make a choice about the color, so it was better to have it gray. So sources. What have these people been working with? One source, and it's rare, are engineering drawings by Eileen Gray herself, and this is an example of the turning table in what we call the coin alcove, the corner sort of siesta bed. And there is a beautiful drawing with measurements, when you can take measurements from it and so forth. So this is the coin alcove as Gautier left it. And this is the version that we did first, 2 years before the Association Cap Moderne, which is not a precise reconstruction. I mean, this was a lamp, but we just had a blue piece of glass because we couldn't work out how it should be done. And the wood is not paneled wood like was done at the time. It's effectively plywood painted over, and the turning table is not bad, but it's heavier, it's thicker metal than the original, and so forth. But I was particularly eager that we should have something which at least showed how it worked, and that you could have a bed, if it's not the right bed, it's not the right materials and everything, but it shows where somebody is meant to be able to sleep. It shows how you can go from the bed outdoors, down some steps into the garden. This is a key part of Eileen Gray's thinking, and so forth. This is the new version that was done by Burckhardt and Renault, which is infinitely better. That's being installed. Come on. Right. And this is how it is now, with beautiful textiles, redesigned, handmade in many cases, based on the photographs, but also based on hypotheses of the color. We have no idea about the color because it was black and white. But a much better recreation of the table and so forth. And, you know, the light now works, the switches work, and there is a mosquito net being demonstrated by Michael Lickerman. The mosquito net pulls out along the cord and makes a tent, and you sleep under that. And the light switches work, of course. And this is how it was. And I think, you know, you can defend their version of it, you know, in depth. Yeah. Oh, yes, the rugs. Another thing very important is textiles, curtains and rugs. Eileen Gray made rugs with her friend Evelyn Weil. In fact, it was the most substantial source of income she had from her design work with these rugs. And they'd been to Morocco to study hand weaving of knotted rugs. And so this is a rug which is, again, an iconography. It's called the centimeter rug, which you can see in close-up of the same photograph. And what's interesting, she called it the centimeter rug, but actually you can't read the numbers here. It's thick tufted wool. You can see that from the original photograph. Aram, the English designer, made a number of Eileen Gray's pieces of furniture, including a number of rugs, in collaboration with Eileen Gray, but of course for a completely different market, for basically a contract market. And so his version of the centimeter rug, which we had until recently on show, because he very kindly gave us all these pieces of furniture come from Aram, but here you can see that there are numbers. It's literally a centimeter rug, and it's flat. And what we've reconstructed is something which is much closer to the original, with a guess about the color, but almost certainly correct. So among the sources, there are sometimes, very rarely, drawings by Eileen Gray. This is one of them, and this is for a ceiling light in the little tiny vestibule by the bathroom, which again picks up a de Stijl motif. The red bit is the metal support for the lamp. So this is a section through the metal support for a tubular lamp, but this is in plan view of the top. And one of the other sources that is extremely important was a series of drawings done by two Swiss architects called Hecker and Müller, who in the 1990s went round the house and made hundreds of sketches, measured sketches of objects which still were in the house. And these were also very useful in some of the reconstructions. But here you can see that their reconstruction of this particular thing is different from Eileen Gray's own design. And nothing remains of the original. So as it's restored, we've followed Eileen Gray's design rather than the Hecker and Müller drawing. And we'll see there's another example of Hecker and Müller drawing which is not quite accurate. So you have to be careful with sources. Just to give an idea of the... So, yes, good, yes, when? What, in the...
When the lamp was still there.
It was still there. Did you measure it?
I measured on site.
You measured it?
Yeah,
Yes.
I lived in the house for several months.
Okay, you should be doing the lecture.
I don't interrupt from
No, it's interesting.
I'm wrong,
No, but you see, this is the choice. I mean,
I had the key of the house for several years.
sure. But I mean, did you measure like the Hecker and Müller?
It was still there. I'm Christian Müller.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. Okay, there you are. Okay, good. Yes. So,
The lamp was still there.
yes, right. So we made, in that case, a mistake. We've gone for the Eileen Gray. Yes, we've gone for the Eileen Gray drawing because it has privilege and so forth. Yeah. Okay. We'll come to another of your sketches later. I'm so glad to meet you. That's great. Yeah, great. So here was the bedroom, and I'm running over length, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. This is the photograph of the bedroom in 1929. And one of the things is this amazing fur throw. Now, if you remember the boudoir and hall at Monte Carlo had another of these fur throws. And she liked to give this exotic touch and things. And here you have this amazing thing in this modernist villa. The Burkhardt and Wenner decided that it was, I think it's a Siberian goat. It's certainly not a sheep, you can see that, but it's a particularly beautiful material. And it raises the whole question, which I'm trying to talk about the relationship between Art Deco and modern. For some people, this is embarrassing. This is not what a modernist should be doing. Okay. But this is what, or something like it, was what Eileen Gray was doing. And again, this is all of this is reconstructed. This fitment, which is cantilevered out from the wall but supported at one end, was basically like milliner's shelves, in shops where you have glass-fronted things that you can see what's in the drawers and so forth. And the top lifts up like that. And she used this celluloid. She liked celluloid a lot, so this celluloid covering. And this piece of corrugated, probably asbestos originally, was something that she put in. And she writes very beautifully about a curved line, which is like a line going for a walk. And this is completely, it's a gift. It's a visual gift. It's got no functional importance whatsoever. Another detail is this stool. Now this is very interesting because this is an example, and there are many examples in the house, where through research, this is research by Renaud Barrès, he managed to find something which is at least 2/3 completely authentic, because he puzzled about this stool. How did Eileen Gray make this stool, which is designed to swivel? It's sprung and swivel. And he discovered that there's a label on it called Ash & Sons. And Ash & Sons are the main provider of dental furniture in Britain. So he found an example of one of these. This is a completely authentic one, exactly the same as Eileen Gray had, and all they did was remake the poof at the top, the seat at the top. And a similar approach is to the light switches. Gattier just put plastic light switches in. Okay. And what they did, there's a wonderful guy called Raphael, who you'll see in the film, who has a world collection of 1930s junk. So he would come with suitcases with 150 light switches, and the architects would choose the best ones. And so these are 1930s or 20s, I don't know, actual original light switches, done, and the only modern thing in them is the glass plates in front, because she did this, with some other architects did as well, of putting glass plates so that you could see the mechanism inside. On the whole of the south front of the house, there's surface wiring. And again, you'll see Raphael talking about the surface wiring. It was made by hand, surface wiring. It now carries 12 volts because you can't obviously expose 240 volts to the public. Curiously, the only place where I've seen this is in Mexico City, where the studios of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo have this surface wiring throughout, exactly the same. Now, whether they saw this, which I'd be surprised, or at least probably they saw the volume of Architecture Vivante, it's exactly the same with these ceramic insulators. And this, which is a Chamberlain water purifier, it has ceramic cores here, which you can take out from time to time and clean. This is a real one they found to replace the one that was lost. So there's an element of archaeology in replacing from authentic pieces from the time, which is a very important part of this. There's another thing, I'm sorry, we did start a little bit late, didn't we? But I need to, yes, okay, I'm getting danger signals. I'm nearly done. This interested me very much, because the control of space is also control of light. And Eileen Gray was aware of the fact that this big window facing the south projects a lot of light, a lot of hard light into the interior. So what she did was one of the bays of curtains was dark velvet. So she could control the light and create shadow and prevent too much light burning through, as you see rather in this photograph. Okay, this is very quickly, this is the Carte Marine. This was how the house was presented in a film called The Price of Desire. And to do that, they made this marine chart, which is not... and I'm not going to talk about this because Renaud Barrès explains it in the film. I'll let him explain it. But this was a reconstruction that we did of Eileen Gray's marine chart. And you can see that it has the same problems that the original one must have had, made of tracing paper, faced with the sea air. In 1 year, it's completely buckled like this. And Eileen Gray's chart didn't last very long, because by 1938, Le Corbusier took lots of photographs of the interior and it had gone. So I'm finishing with this, which is the turning table in the bedroom, which is like the other one, but much more complicated. And here, now I don't know whether this is one of your drawings or not, but very detailed drawing, but what it doesn't tell you is where this support attaches to the underside of the table, and therefore how this piece folds round and back. And Wilfrid Wang, who's also a researcher into Eileen Gray, has produced a book about E-1027 and an exhibition in Austin, Texas, where his students recreated the whole bedroom. This is the version they did of the table, and they put the support along one side, reasonably, so that the thing could swing round and close. But what he hadn't noticed is that there's a slot here. And when this piece closes, there's a slot in this, and well, the two slots line up, and you can swing it round, and that slot matches the support. So that's seen from the top. Absolutely beautiful piece of work. And this, if you can understand it, is seen from the bottom, and you can see where this comes round and slots in there, and then this undoes from the, this is just resting here, and it folds and then clips away underneath. And that's absolutely a beautiful piece of work, but incredibly fragile. So on the first day that it was installed, it broke, and it's broken again since then. And this is one of the difficulties about design restoration, that if you do things absolutely beautiful as the originals were, and you have visitors, there are going to be problems. And this is perhaps something we could talk about later. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Tim Benton. A fascinating story that dealt with a lot of skill levels in which you can research and deal with the aspects that go from Art Deco and modernism to this very specialized technical research. Thank you so much. So I think there is time for just one or two questions. If people really want to, there's one other mic.
I take your mic and you stand there, or is that?
There's another one.
Yeah.
So Natasha wears sneakers for the day, just to walk around.
Well, is it working? Yeah.
Is there someone who wants to comment on what he or she has heard, or maybe a question?
Yes,
Wessel.
one up there.
Wessel de Jong.
Yes, Vessel, yes.
Ga jij naar Wessel toe met een microfoon?
Oh ja, sorry.
Yeah.
Just keep the questions first, all the questions in this part,
Yeah, okay.
and then in that part.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for this fascinating lecture. When we were working on the Tugendhat House in Brno, there was this huge debate about the museum concept for the place. You know, is it a place where you want people to be able to sit down and experience the view the same way? Or do you want the place to be fitted with original furniture that people cannot sit in? What was the idea, you know, how visitors would experience the place, would perceive the place? What was the concept?
The concept, there's a fierce argument that's been going on all the time. I've been working with the guides. Basically, I've written the manual for the guides, and most of my involvement in the project is with the presentation, you know, which is essential for the economic survival of the thing. And so I have welcomed the fact that there are Aram chairs, Bibendum chair, the Transat chair, the divan, which people can sit on and get the right angle of view to look out and so forth. There's also a big bench, which is an Aram bench by Eileen Gray, which was never in that house, but it's extremely useful because people can sit on it. It's a 2-hour visit, often for 2 months of the year, extremely hot. And if you have older people, you know, they need to sit down. Now, Renault and Burkhardt won't have any of that. They've got to stand, you know. And I just don't think it's feasible. So they don't yet have a contract to remake all the movable furniture, but the plan is that they will remake the Bibendum chair, remake the Transat chair, remake the dining chairs, and they will all be much more delicate. They will have this tuile-enduit surface, which will be ripped by anybody with a stud in their back pocket, which sits in it, and they won't be allowed to sit in it. And the danger is you'll get to a position where we'll have a cord across and you won't be able to go in. And, you know, one of the whole things that people like Eileen Gray, but Rietveld also, most of the real designers do is haptic. It's about touch. It's about getting your bottom, you know, in contact. And I think it's a big problem. I think it's a huge problem. And I mean, I respect Renault and Burkhardt's professionalism and fanaticism and so forth. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I've been absolutely astonished watching them work. But there's a fundamental tension between use and choosing the thing, making the thing a laboratory. How did you resolve it? No, okay, right.
No, in the Sonneveld house, neither.
No.
It is a very delicate
Yeah.
situation in which you have to be realistic sometimes, change thoughts that you had several years ago.
Yeah.
So we change rules, regulations in the house as well. Yeah.
I think the Sonneveld house is a very good compromise, actually, because you can touch things, you can move around and so forth. And probably some of the chairs you could sit in.
Yes, you can. Not on the original ones,
No.
but on the remakes.
Yeah.
But things have changed since it opened in 2001. So it's an interesting aspect of this whole restoration project.
Up.
At the very high end of the room.
Hello, I'm Charlotte, and I've been studying at the TU Delft. I got to know Eileen Gray because of my feminist actions, and we were looking for an underdog, and we found Eileen Gray. And since that time, I got really inspired by her work.
Yep.
Thank you very much for showing. What I've learned from what I read was that the haptic thing and touch and senses were very important in her work, especially if you compare it to the work of Le Corbusier.
Yep.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, yes. Okay. I mean, compared with Corbusier, for example, it's difficult to compare with Corbusier because he designed very little modernist furniture. He designed a lot of furniture in La Chaux de Fonds in a neoclassical style. But the three famous chairs and the table were all done with Charlotte Perriand. And Charlotte Perriand was also somebody who had a very strong sense of, color and feel and texture and so forth. And I annoy my Le Corbusier comrades by arguing that the chaise longue by Le Corbusier sits rightly in an Art Deco show because it has iconography. You cannot see the chaise longue without thinking of the body of a woman. And that's how Charlotte Perriand herself presented it. This photograph, which is sometimes described as poor Charlotte Perriand being exhibited, and so forth, a fetishistic woman, she designed the photograph. It's her photograph. It's how she wanted the design. And she had a major part of the design of those three pieces of furniture. So, I think as I say, the chaise longue, and rarely the Grand Confort armchair sit very nicely in an Art Deco exhibition, alongside Pierre Charot, alongside many other designers who are on the borderline between Art Deco and modernism. But this is anathema to most of my Corbusier tribe.
So then
Okay, if I look at the clock, I
Yes.
think we should start the film. Just before we start the film, I just want to recommend once again, if people want to read one of your books, they can come and visit the library. Although we also have some original letters by Eileen Gray, correspondence between Eileen Gray and Weideveld. I saw
right.
that in the Weideveld archive.
Okay.
So maybe that's for another time.
I would like to mention that in our announcement we said the film is 55 minutes, but we have cut it back to 42
45.
minutes. So for people who have to catch a train,
Yes.
know that it's 42 minutes.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry I went over length, but...
We enjoyed it very
Okay.
much. Thank you.
You right? So the film's in French, but it has English subtitles.
Thank you all for coming. I thank Hetty for having us here, for welcoming us all, and being my board member also. I thank Tim, of course, for taking up the challenge for this tour de force through Europe, and for the insightful lecture. And so I hope you will all go and see E-1027, and to see you back again next year when we talk about Melnikov House. Thank you very much.